Hello everyone, on this nice day I'm happy to introduce a piece of Hungarian computing history, the HT-1080Z school computer. You might think it's small, but as you can see by comparing it to the Commodore 64, it is actually quite big. So what makes this machine so interesting? As some of you may know from the previous video, it won the first school computer program competition, and aside from the TVC, was likely the most common computer found in Hungarian schools. While often considered a purely Hungarian product of Híradástechnika, its origins are a bit more nuanced. In reality, it is closely related to the Radio Shack TRS-80 Model 1. The first Trash 80 was part of the Holy Trinity of the early personal computers, alongside the Commodore PET and Apple II. I'll discuss the advantages and disadvantages of this connection later on. Let's take a look at what this computer offered. It features an expansion slot, video output for a monitor, a tape drive connection for loading and saving data, and a power switch. You may also notice a small blue port, which I will explain in more detail later on. Few models often had a cable extending from the bottom to connect to a TV. It is requiring to tune the TV to a given channel, but earlier I removed it from this computer. Now let's open it up and see what's inside. As you can see, this particular unit isn't screwed together. It's my personal tinkering and demonstration machine. Inside we find a power supply, the built-in tape drive, and a small instrument belonging to the first generation of these HD models. The keyboard is connected to the two main PCBs. One houses the CPU, the Z80 in this case, and the memory. The other board mainly responsible for the video output, including the RF output. I have mentioned the cable. This is where it was connected. The construction of this machine is really robust, to put it mildly. The gauge and the manual tape level record control indicates that it's a relatively early model. These were later replaced with an automated level control system and an LED. I estimate its manufacturing time somewhere around 1983 or 1984, which means this particular machine is a little bit older than 40 years. Despite its age, it is still in pretty good working order, although the tape drive mechanism isn't quite 100%. It still opens and can fast forward and rewind, though rewinding is a bit weaker. Since I use this computer regularly, I've made a couple of modifications to this machine. First, I replaced the keyboard cable with a ribbon cable. A microcontroller-based Z80 emulator has been also installed. I've created a separate blog post and video about this second modification, which I'll link in the description. What is particularly interesting about this computer is that, while it is a Hungarian product, it is not a Hungarian design. As I already mentioned, it is based on TRS-80 Model 1. However, it is not a direct copy. Instead, the TRS-80 was copied in the Far East, and we acquired a license for that copy. So you could say that it's a copy of a copy, or it's better to say a licensed copy. I'm not sure what is the best term for that. The great advantage of this close relationship is that the copy was so accurate that I can even use the TRS-80 schematics for repairs. The software compatibility is also excellent. I've tested many programs, and I have encountered very few programs that wouldn't run on it. It also means that I'm able to boot the operating system of the TRS-80 Model 1. As the Z80 emulator includes a fully functional floppy emulator, this allows me to boot from a virtual floppy disk and run programs. This gives me a wide range of options for games and applications. Let me reassemble the computer, and then I will demonstrate how to load the program from a cassette tape. Okay, the case is gently back on. Let's plug in the computer. Now all I need is a cassette. I have it here with this home computer label, which differs from the standard tapes in that It is much shorter. It stores only about 10 minutes of data. This makes rewinding much faster and also makes easier to find the programs. Back in the day, we noted the program starting point on the tape, so we just rewinded it to the beginning, and then we winded it to the given point, so we just nullified this counter, and that's it. For example, Galaxy starting at counter position 82, so I'm rewinding it to the beginning, reset the counter as I'm doing now, fast forward to 82, and then load the program. And of course I need to turn the computer on. Now the computer is on, but if I just press play, nothing happens. That is because the computer can control the tape drive, but I need to rewind or fast forward. I can achieve this by pressing F1. This also makes possible to adjust the audio level. The level needs to be set so that the signal falls within the two markers on the display. This was crucial because if the recording or playback levels were off, the program wouldn't load properly. This could sometimes involve minutes of frustrating trial and error. Luckily, I don't need to play with it because I have some experience with this one, so I know how to set it. Okay, I got ahead of myself. First of all, I need to rewind first. As I mentioned, rewinding isn't its strongest suit, so I'll flip the tape over and rewind it that way. This is one of the things I can dodge by using the floppy emulator. Okay, here we go, but instead of just pressing play, I need to enter the magic cload. This command is for loading basic programs. If you want to load machine code, it requires a different command. Now it will take a few minutes for the computer to find the program on the tape and then load it. There is a modern solution, so it is also possible to make a cable for the red port and use a mobile phone to whistle the program into the computer. In this case, you still need to find the right audio level, but it's a good alternative. Newer version of the HT-1080Z incorporated more modern features, like one was the increased memory. So this one has just 16 kilobytes, but newer versions had up to 48 kilobytes. Also, the newer models started to support lower and upper letters, as well as the Hungarian characters. The adjustment of the audio level became automated. As far as I know, the mechanical unit was also changed. It made the whole program loading a bit more reliable. Let's talk a bit about the physical aspects of the computer. It is housed in the plastic case that is showing its age with some wears and tears around, but still it is in a good shape. It can be cleaned, but you have to be careful. Isopropyl alcohol can damage the plastic, potentially wearing and smearing the white finish and creating more work for you later on. You can also see how the case around the tape drive has been worn by the years. Of course, it is natural because so many students used these kind of machines, and several times they were not so friendly with these computers. I already talked about the TRS-80 legacy a little bit. The positive side is that we can use a lot of programs. But because of this connection, the computer was also criticized, and with some justification. When it was reviewed in contemporary magazines, several flaws were pointed out. As I mentioned, these were gradually improved, but the underlying design was somewhat outdated. The TRS-80 Model 1 was released in 1977, and by 1983 it was really showing its age. Even people at the time were aware of this, especially since the Commodore 64 was already available. In my previous video I mentioned that we were behind the Iron Curtain, so it was still a step forward, but still it was visible for us. This is also reflected in the technical specifications. The CPU was a Zilog Z80 clone running at 1.77 MHz, which was slow for the time. Compared to the ZX Spectrum or another Z80 based computers, it was roughly half the speed. The base memory of 16 KB was also limited when it was released. While some later machines also had this amount of memory, like the Commodore 16, the Commodore 64 or Atari 800XL had 64 KB. The display was particularly lacking. The text resolution was 64 by 16 characters, or also it was possible to switch it over to 32 by 16 characters. There was a supposed graphics mode, but it wasn't true bitmap graphics. Instead, it stored a 2 by 3 pixel block in place of each character, resulting in a resolution of 128 by 48 pixels. Additionally, it was monochrome with only black and white, while for example the VIC-20 was already in color, as were the Spectrum, C64, Atari, Texas Instruments computers. Interestingly, the sound capabilities were improved, although I'm not entirely sure why. A sound chip was added, but the basic programming language didn't support it. It was local Hungarian expansion, and this is the reason behind, but it also meant that it could only be used with machine code. And since the TRS-80 programs didn't include it, and the Hungarian developed programs were particularly educational, it was rare to find any software that actually utilized the sound chip. From a technical standpoint, there was another criticism because it required a lot of TTL ICs. The architecture was very simple, using just the standard TTL logic chips. There weren't any particular innovative solutions, which meant it required a lot of components. On the other hand, this also meant that the computer was relatively easy to repair. In 1983, the computer was reviewed in Bitlet magazine, where some of its shortcomings were noted, including the tape drive and the memory size. There was also a critical letter to the editor from Károly Simonyi. It is fascinating to read his comments because he criticized the computer not only from a technical perspective, but also from an economical one. It might be harder to understand now, but the cost of the computer in dollars was significant at the time. The centralized Hungarian economy struggled to produce convertible currency, like dollars, Deutschmark, or Austrian shilling, and the machine was very expensive. Therefore, there was a strong push for internal sourcing, and when I say internal, I mean sourcing the components from Hungary or from one of the friendly communist countries. However, at the beginning, almost all of the components were imported from the West. This later changed, but it took some time. Looking back 4 decades later, it is clear that Simonyi was right about the computer being outdated. The limitation of the Kádár regime and the economic realities also played a role. Decision makers tried to strike a balance between these factors, and they somewhat were successful. Was the 1080Z a good school computer? I tend to say yes. Its construction was robust enough to withstand use by children. There were programs available for it, and it was easy and inexpensive to repair. Of course, when it is compared to computers available in the West, the familiar Hungarian orange effect comes into play. A little bit more pale, a little bit more sour, but it's ours. The same can be said for the improved versions submitted to the second school computer competition. It was a more significant upgrade with color display and theoretical compatibility with the ZX Spectrum. However, We only read about the 3080C in newspapers because I think very few people actually saw one. By the time it was released, the Videoton TV computer and Commodore Plus 4 and C16 were much better machines. Or if I may say it that way, for the same money, they offered much more. But let's see what an upgraded machine could do. The one in the front of me has 48 KB of memory and a floppy emulator. You might be wondering why I haven't connected it to the monitor yet. The reason is that my monitor is a bit noisy, but I'll do that now. I'm connecting it to the monitor and a capture card at the same time. You might notice some snowing on the screen. Those are the white flashes on the screen. This is because there isn't a circuit to prevent the CPU from writing to the same memory that is being used for the display. And when we have a conflict between the write and read operations, the result is some snowing. It is not too distracting, and it is understandable because in 1977, when the TRS-80 was designed, the Model 1 was designed, it was more important to get on the market, so it was not on the focus. Let's see what it's like to boot from a floppy disk. You can see I'm booting NEWDOS, a fully functional operating system, and now I can quickly load programs and games from the emulated floppy disk drive. I think I've talked enough about this computer. If you have any stories or experiences related to it or any of the siblings, for example the video Genie, I would love to hear them in the comments. Thanks for joining me, and until the next time, I wish you a good play. Goodbye.